Right. Can everyone hear me? I think we're about ready to start. We have our minister, we have our keynote speaker. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Very welcome to this, the 4th Hydrogen for Life conference in this wonderful, wonderful venue in the shadows of that beautiful, iconic gasometer, which used to hold town gas, which contains hydrogen. Bit better than that, please. Which contains hydrogen. Thank you very much. And that's why we're all here. My name's Natascha Engel. I used to be a member of Parliament and Deputy Speaker for a short time to the not uncontroversial Speaker John Bercow, who some of you might remember. Since Parliament, I've set up a think tank called Palace Yard, where we bring together industry experts, people with experience, and policymakers, and provide briefings for parliamentarians on things that are often quite controversial. So things like net zero, climate change, energy, how to decarbonise energy, all that kind of simple stuff. And that's why we focus most of our attention has been on how do we decarbonise the energy that we use. And by quite a long way, the most complicated, far-reaching, defining policy of our generation and beyond is net zero, of course. And it is net zero that makes hydrogen so important, and why this event, Hydrogen for Life, has become such a significant annual feature of the energy calendar. I'm delighted to be the mistress of ceremonies today, so thank you very much for inviting me to do this. And we've got a very packed agenda full of lots and lots of really interesting speakers. And just a very quick thank you to the people who've made this possible. First of all, the sponsors, Bosch, National Gas, Centrica, EDF Hynamics, Ceres, Power, and Exelum. Thank you very, very much for your generous support. Without this, it would never have happened. And also, a very big thank you goes to the Bosch team. Iman, where are you, Iman? There you are. Iman, Wilson, Janie, yes, absolutely. Wilson, Janie, and the Zen-like James Turgoose, who has been absolutely amazing, working on this event even before it was postponed because of the general election. So it's been a long time in the making. So thank you very much, all of you, for sticking with this through thick and thin, and there's been quite a lot of thick and thin. So this year, for the first time, H4Life has gone multi-tiered. From 11:30 downstairs, so that's after the coffee break, there are speakers and events from the worlds of automotive and transport. Obviously all still hydrogen-themed, and some amazing exhibitions. I saw the cars this morning. They looked absolutely brilliant. So have a look around, take loads of pictures, put them on LinkedIn, and say how wonderful the event is. Hopefully you had some nice breakfast downstairs. Teas and coffees are available all day. Lunches from 1 till 2, and we'll finish very promptly at 4:15, at which point you'll be invited for a glass of wine. James, Iman, Janie, you can have, Wilson, you can have at least a bottle each, I think. And we're absolutely delighted to have Sarah Jones, Minister for Industry, who will be speaking very shortly. And after lunch, we'll be joined by Baron Ben Houchen, the Mayor for Tees Valley, amongst lots of other interesting speakers. And as if that wasn't exciting enough, we are very privileged to be joined by international speakers today. People from the US, somebody's flying in from New York, lots of people from Germany, Italy, and Australia. Thank you everyone for taking the time and making the effort to be with us today. We're really, really pleased that you're here. And you, dear audience, we really hope that we hope that you'll really participate, because we want to hear your views. And there are lots of different ways of submitting questions. One is just by raising your hand, but there's a QR code which will be up somewhere, and then we can get questions on the screens that I can then ask people. But before that, to kick off the day, it gives me an enormous pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, John Butterworth. John, you will always have a very special place in my heart, because you won't even remember this, but when you first launched National Gas, you asked Palace Yard to host the event on the House of Commons terrace. So you kind of launched National Gas, but you also launched us as well. So I will always be in your debt, John. So please, everybody, welcome John Butterworth.
Thank you very much for that, Natascha. That must mean cheaper rates in the future. I guess for those of you that don't know around here that well, that gas holder is a thing of beauty. If you haven't had a good look at it, you need to. In 1877, it was the biggest gas holder in the world. And just around here, another quarter of a mile towards Westminster, the first gas lights in the world in 1812 were all supplied with 54% hydrogen. So, this is not a new thing. We're just moving forward with innovation and technology from coal to natural gas, and now the next stage of our evolution to net zero will be hydrogen. So thank you, Natascha, for that kind introduction, and good morning, everybody. Lummin, Harry, that was awful. Good morning, everybody. Last time, then I give up. Morning. Come on, energy. So, it's a pleasure to be with you today and to speak to you about an important opportunity and I think a responsibility that all of us have in this room, because to get hydrogen away is going to take our shoulders behind the wheel. And we're all in this room going to have to do that because it's not going to happen otherwise. We need to push hard, push really hard for people to understand the importance of what we all do and what we're trying to achieve. So, unsurprisingly, I'm going to talk a lot about hydrogen and how we can collectively unlock that role of hydrogen in the UK's future energy security, so we can achieve clean power and provide an affordable and sustainable pathway for heavy industry to decarbonise, protect over 1 million jobs and ensure our national and economic security of this country is safeguarded in the process. As many of you will know, I'm the CEO of National Gas, but I also, many of you won't know, I'm the National Emergency Coordinator. So if things go wrong in the future, my role with some of the team is to make sure that we do whatever needs to be done to protect the energy security of our country. And that comes with quite a responsibility. So I've got a vested interest to make sure we get hydrogen away and we get it right. Because as we get more renewables on the grid, everything changes and we've got to be more fleet of foot. So I've worked in the sector for over 45 years. I started at 16 in Manchester Gas Works, and I've seen a tremendous amount of change in my time. But never, ever has there been the pace and scale of transformation in this sector, in our energy, as we are seeing today. We stand on the precipice of a global energy change, and it will fall to you in this room to guide and sustain it. We are it. We have to make it happen, and there is so much prosperity for our country that we can market around the world, and so many jobs at risk on the other side if we get this wrong. I know many of you are like me, dedicated to this cause of achieving net zero and clean power. But I also know that you understand that we cannot just launch into this massive endeavour without a plan. This hydrogen network is like the railways, it's like building the canals. And we need to make sure that we can protect industry, protect jobs, so that the gas they rely on today, they have a new molecule that they can burn in the future seamlessly. It's critical that we never forget the integral role gas plays in our society. Put very simply, it keeps the lights on. Last year, around 1/3 of our electricity came from gas in the UK. There were 199 days when, without gas, the lights in this country would have gone out. Whilst critical for our power supply, it's also worth remembering that electricity, which we talk a lot about, is only about 20% of the energy in the UK, and gas accounts for around 40% of the UK's total. We risk underestimating the key role gas plays in scale and importance, not only to homes and businesses, but also to key heavy industries like glass, paper, steel, cement. I could go on and on. Many years ago, too many to admit actually, we had an emergency exercise in Manchester, and it was in the 80s, and I was a junior. I have no idea what my job was, but I was in charge of a teeny bit of the gas emergency service in Manchester. And we had this exercise, and I was told I had to isolate my sector. And I didn't know that it was pretend, so I actually did isolate it. And I remember turning off the 2 gas turbines to McVitie's that made 14 million Jaffa cakes a day. And I got a written warning. My boss tried to sack me. And I learned that day that you can do all this stuff in isolation, but customers that pay our wages, that employ people, they're the ones that are really important, and we've got to take them with us. And I never forgot that lesson about how important customers are and how much power they have actually. And so that's something, you know, we need to redouble our efforts around, that our customers need to be taken with us. In National Gas, we have 6 million gas metering customers, and 121,000 of those, they can't electrify. There's no technology for them to electrify. So we need to make sure that we consult them and we get them understanding the importance of that when gas becomes illegal in 2050, that there's a pathway now that they can see for a successful future in hydrogen. But joking aside, the National Gas Transmission System is central to the UK's energy security, and it will continue to be so for a long time. Gas will continue to play an important role in supplying vital industries and making products that the world wants to buy from us. Let me go back to electricity. The new National Energy System Operator predicts that we will need at least as many gas-fired power stations in the future as we have today, if not more, to meet peak demand in electricity. Because as you remember, as we electrify, we're going to need more hydrogen to power stations. And we mustn't lose sight of that fact, because if we do, it will be at our peril. Yesterday morning, to bring things to life, for example, only 8% of the electricity in this country came from renewables. Gas, nuclear and biomass at Drax took the load and generated the electricity for the day. And of course, because of the nature of our atmosphere, the colder it is, the less wind there is. So when we really need it, it's not always there. Every winter, this will be a regular occurrence. I grew up in Manchester, and I know better than anyone just how unreliable the sun can be. It wasn't until I was 8 years old I actually saw it. Or instead, if you don't think about the UK, look at Germany the week before last. 70,000 megawatts of wind power capacity, and only 400 megawatts was available one day, less than 1%. If it had been colder, security of supply in Germany could have been affected. So what should that tell us about our country? Is that we need a secure, stable fuel to supply us when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And for us at National Gas, the answer to that is hydrogen. There is nothing else. Now, I've spent my entire career in the gas industry. I began as a gas engineer in the 70s at a time when natural gas was heralded as the saviour of industry as coal declined. We thought we were saving the planet in 1979. Now, as a CEO of a gas company, I find myself at the vanguard of yet another transformation as we looked in coming decades to switch to hydrogen. Gas can be the saviour of British energy and security of supply and British industry again, except this time the gas will be hydrogen. As we look to 2050, we have a responsibility to current and future generations to make sure that this new transition is managed effectively and safely. The ongoing COP29 has demonstrated the dangers of not bringing all stakeholders and partners with us as we navigate this essential transition. Today, I'm calling on all of us, all of you, industry leaders, policymakers, regulators, to rally behind our heavy industries and provide them with the choice and solution on their journey to net zero. We must ensure that they're equipped not to survive, but to thrive in the coming decades. That is really important. Over 1 million jobs in the UK need a stable gas source. Hydrogen is the only solution that can keep them viable. Without it, We risk the future of industries critical to our sovereign capability leaving our shores. I was with one of the largest industrialists a few weeks ago who said, if I don't get hydrogen, John, we're out of this country. We have to deliver in this room. We have to redouble our efforts. And for our power system, in a future where dependence on natural gas will decline, hydrogen will become the bridge that will secure our supply during the coldest, darkest days of winter, on days a little bit like today. As we work towards the government's net zero targets, it's crucial that gas-dependent industries, such as steel, currently in jeopardy in the UK, adapt to remain competitively global. Not every industry can switch to electricity. For many, that just isn't an option. So, step forward hydrogen as the protector of industry, of jobs, of economic growth, and of security of supply of this country in its coldest days. The government's recent budget allocation of £3.9 billion for the carbon capture and hydrogen industries is encouraging and really helpful. But unfortunately, we need more. To meet our net zero goal by 2050, we now need clarity on CCUS Track 2 funding, especially for Scotland's Acorns cluster, something I'm passionate about because we're going to repurpose the whole of our feeder 10 so that we don't have to lay a new pipeline to decarbonise Grangemouth, which is the biggest employer in Scotland. It requires no building, no new build, no digging up the countryside, no laying new pipes. It will all be done virtually through repurposing the existing gas transmission system. Our existing St Fergus terminal in Aberdeenshire can transport CO2 on a massive scale because of its scale and its complexity. Decarbonising our industry without risking jobs or growth is a complex challenge. Growing up in Manchester, as I said before, I saw the decimation of local communities when heavy industry pulled out and we couldn't keep up with global competition. It was really sad to see people who were proud with no work. We cannot allow the green transition to become a byword for deindustrialisation, or we risk losing consent for the net zero transition. It must be about revitalisation. So today we are in the good company of a strong hydrogen advocate, the Minister for Industry, Sarah Jones, who will be speaking to us shortly. But before I hand over to the Minister, let me outline the ambition we need to meet this moment. The National Infrastructure Commission has laid out a clear vision. We need to approach hydrogen infrastructure with the same determination that the Victorians built the railways during the Industrial Revolution. It is hydrogen pipelines that will underpin the green industrial revolution, just as the railways did during the last one, connecting industries and power stations across Britain. Our pipelines will be the railways of this green industrial revolution. At National Gas, we're ready to lead this effort with strong government support. The core hydrogen network that we can build can deliver enormous economic benefits and give businesses the confidence to invest in hydrogen as a cornerstone of supporting Great Britain and great British industry. So before I finish, there are three things I'd like to leave you with. Our core asks, if you like. Firstly, please approve blending. Blending a small amount of hydrogen into our transmission system will follow the example of other countries worldwide and allow for interoperability with our European partners. At the minute, if gas comes to our pipelines on our borders, we were going to have to not allow it into our country because it will be illegal. Because at the minute, we can only allow 0.1% hydrogen into our gas stream. So if it arrives at our border greater than that, we won't be able to accept it. And if that's in winter when we really need it, that will be a problem. All the testing has been done at our Future Grid project up in Cumbria, and we're ready to go. It's been showcased to everyone. All the empirical evidence is there. We just need help to get it across the line and get it approved so we can start putting hydrogen at small levels into our system. Secondly, please help us back a core hydrogen network. We stand ready to deliver this network. We know it is essential for a resilient nationwide hydrogen supply that positions the UK as a future hydrogen exporter to Europe. Our core hydrogen network will be called Project Union, and it will stretch the length and breadth of Great Britain, going to all our major cities and all of the locations of heavy industry. But we need to act now to develop this network, to protect jobs and to reinforce the government's goal of making Britain a clean energy superpower. Finally, the third ask is to give us the green light to get CCUS away in Scotland and repurpose our existing Feeder 10. We need Track 2 funding to be confirmed to give investors in the Acorn project the green light to protect jobs and future-proof the Scottish industrial heartland, ensuring no part of our islands are left behind. With government and industry united, we can decarbonise Britain's power system and support our industrial giants through this transition, delivering clean power by 2030 and net zero by 2050. With this in mind, I am delighted to introduce someone who I know is passionate about helping us to deliver these goals. The Minister was passionate, very passionate, before she was in power, so I know she has that energy and support for what we are trying to achieve in this room. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Minister for Industry, Sarah Jones MP.
Thank you so much. That was a very clear list of 3 asks that was very succinctly delivered and very well heard by me. Look, it's an absolute pleasure to join you this morning. It's lovely to see Natascha, who was incredibly helpful to me when we were in opposition and does an incredible job. So good to see her here too. So right now, my colleagues are in Baku and they're getting stuck into the second week of climate negotiations. We may be 3,000 miles away and 4 time zones apart, and I'm not sure there are many cricket stadiums in Azerbaijan, but the discussions we are having today are intrinsically linked. Because everywhere they go at COP, whether that's the Prime Minister or the Secretary of State or the Climate Minister, they're spreading the same message. We are halfway through the decisive decade to halt climate change, and we are way off track. So it's up to all of us, from Baku to Brixton, to change that trajectory by pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible, whether it's in hydrogen, carbon capture, or renewables. It's our job to prove that climate action goes hand in hand with energy security, with lower bills, and with economic growth. That's the pledge which we fought and won the election on. A pledge to make us safer by reducing our reliance on volatile fossil fuel markets. A pledge to make people better off by protecting them from spikes in bills, as well as creating hundreds of thousands of green jobs. And a pledge to build a more sustainable future as we accelerate to net zero. I was in Poland last week at the Rebuild Ukraine conference, an annual conference looking at how to help Ukraine rebuild its energy infrastructure. And we saw since that conference the attacks that we have witnessed from Putin attacking again energy supplies in Ukraine. And the Ukrainian ministers were talking about hydrogen, they were talking about carbon capture, they were talking about renewable energy, because they understand, just as we do, that in order to secure our security in the future, as well as tackle the climate change, we need to be embracing these new technologies. I think it's fair to say we've made a good start in terms of the new government. Our clean energy mission is only 5 months in, but we've already lifted the ban on onshore wind. We have consented large amounts of solar. We held the most successful renewables auction in UK history. We have begun setting up Great British Energy. We've overseen the end of 142 years of coal-powered electricity generation, and fired the starting gun on a whole new carbon capture industry. But nobody is under any illusions that our clean energy mission, including our Clean Power 2030 target, will be easy. Just like all the best missions, this one is designed to be stretching. It's designed to galvanise action behind a clear direction of travel. And it will only succeed if we're willing to use every tool in our arsenal. So let me be clear, hydrogen is one of the best tools we have. Everyone here understands the benefits. Not only can hydrogen help us decarbonise heavy industry and transport, including the most energy-intensive and hard-to-electrify sectors, it can also work with large-scale storage to provide a stable baseload of power, vital for a grid based on intermittent renewables. To put it simply, without a stable hydrogen economy, we won't hit our targets. But what's especially exciting about this sector is its potential for growth. We're still right at the start of our hydrogen story, but that's not an excuse to sit back and see which way the wind blows. It's a call to action. There are so many opportunities here to cut emissions, pioneer new technologies, and develop strong domestic supply chains, all while creating jobs and boosting growth in our industrial heartlands. So I was delighted to hear that Hydrogen UK estimates the sector could deliver 30,000 jobs and add £7 billion to our economy by 2030. And now we're determined to work with you all to realise that potential. First, by building closer links with industry. As co-chair of the Hydrogen Delivery Council, it's my job to bring industry and government together to coordinate efforts to expand the hydrogen economy. And as a new government, we are listening carefully to what you are telling us about both the challenges and the opportunities, so that we can ensure our domestic industry is supported. Second, we're putting our money where our mouth is. In the budget, we committed £2.3 billion for the 11 green hydrogen projects announced in the first hydrogen allocation round. And that's on top of £240 million in capital grant support through the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund, paving the way for a pioneering set of low-carbon projects across the country. We've also announced record funding of up to £21.7 billion over 25 years for hydrogen and carbon capture projects in 2 of our major industrial clusters, including EET Hydrogen in Merseyside, our first large-scale blue hydrogen project. Together, these clusters are expected to create thousands of jobs while bringing in £8 billion in private investment. At the same time, at least £5.8 billion of new National Wealth Fund's capital will also go to clean energy sectors and supply chains, including green hydrogen and carbon capture. But the best way to build supply chains is, of course, through the delivery of projects. And that's why, thirdly, we're doing everything we can to bring the hydrogen economy to life. Officials in my department are currently finalising contracts and agreements on that first wave of projects. We're intending to offer contracts through the Low Carbon Contracts Company as soon as possible to allow them to take final investment decisions. We're also evaluating all the applicants in the second round, which saw a significant increase both in terms of capacity and number, as we continue to lay the groundwork for a hydrogen economy which is competitive and well regulated. I know that our previous updates to markets have been invaluable in providing a sense of overall progress, and I am pleased to let you know that we will publish our next update to the market, including a forward look this winter. But we're also keen to help you unlock the opportunities of the international market for hydrogen goods and services. We've been working proactively with partners to shape the development of global markets, rules and standards, while promoting the role of UK industry within that. Take the UK-Germany hydrogen partnership, signed just over a year ago. It's put both of us at the cutting edge of this new industry. And we'll be deepening that collaboration over the coming years, something you'll hear about more later today. So when COP29 ends on Friday and the world's attention drifts elsewhere, it's up to us to continue innovating and driving the transition forward. After all, we have one of the most attractive business environments around. We have a cutting-edge hydrogen sector. We have a whole range of programs and investment funds ready to support you. So let's work together to harness these strengths and make the UK a genuine global leader on hydrogen as we build the cleaner, more secure, more prosperous future we know is possible. Thank you. I'm looking because I'm thinking you might want to do some questions.
If you can do some questions.
I can do some questions.
Do you want to go and sit down and we'll do a...
Who can do it, yeah?
Oh, no, you haven't got the mic.
I haven't got a mic.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I don't have to do questions. I don't want to, but I can.
We want you to do questions, definitely. Okay, can I have we'll only do like a couple of questions because I know we're running quite late already. I mean, I've sort of got just a general question on what the government's, your key milestones are. You've got a room full of industry people who are all desperate to help. What can they do to help you reach those key milestones?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've got to get the FIDs for the HAR1 projects over the line. I'm really keen to get this market update to everybody by winter, which will set a sort of direction of travel and a forward look. We've then got the spending review, which is obviously the big push that we're working towards, and we are completely committed to the CCUS Track 2 to HAR2. We need to get those through the process of the spending review, and we need to build from there. There's a whole raft of work going on about the regulations, about the global market that our officials are working on with industry, and all of that is being defined as we go. But I think I want to just be really clear that we're very ambitious in this space and we want to make sure we're going as fast as possible. I said in opposition a lot to hydrogen colleagues that I didn't want the election to sort of slow things down, and inevitably just the business of having an election means you lose a few months. But I want us to push as hard as we can to get these projects over the line and to begin to develop that network.
That's brilliant. It's really positive. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Is there anybody who's got kind of a burning question for the Minister before she leaves? Yes, gentleman there.
Oh. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is domestic gas, just touched on. Now, heavy industry is important, but the government's policy, I call the Marie-Antoinette policy, which is let them use heat pumps. Now, in practice, a lot of people won't be able to use heat pumps, or they won't be able to afford it, or they'll simply say, no, I don't want to, and no government's going to force domestic customers to do anything. Can you be sure that domestic gas hydrogen is in the programme, and as soon as possible, every single new boiler for replacement should be 100% hydrogen compatible? At the moment, I understand they're not. They're still being developed.
Thank
It's
you.
important.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, you've touched on a huge challenge, and as we heard earlier, the amount of challenge in heat is very large, and of course the market for heat pumps at the moment is not where we would want it to be, in part because there hasn't been an offer that is attractive to people, that is commercially sensible for them in terms of viability for individual people, and part of the answer is to make sure we're supporting people who can and have the infrastructure in their homes to be able to have a heat pump, to be able to get one. So there's a whole raft of work going on in that space. But you're right, there's a big challenge there, and we haven't quite got the answers to that. And I think it's something that, in the department we're working on very, very hard.
Sarah, thank you so much. And I know you're very pressed for time. So, but thank you so much for coming, and thank you very much for speaking to us and being so positive about hydrogen. Great start to the day. Thank you. Oh, is it not? Oh. Right, so thank you very much to our keynote speakers. Could we have the first panel coming up to the stage? That's Will, Jane, Rita, and Jake. Do you have a watch? Thank you very much, everyone. So this is the first panel of the day. There are 5 panels. We'll finish at 11:15 for coffee, hopefully. What time is it now? What's the time?
11:45.
11:45. Right, so we might run it a little bit longer, but we'll try and keep to time so that we can all have a lovely cup of coffee. So we've now very, very lucky to be joined by 4 people who, between them, are probably responsible for moving hydrogen policy along faster than anyone else. So if you could just sort of very briefly introduce yourself, say who you are, and then I'll chuck a couple of questions at you. Jane, do you want to start?
So I'm Jane Toogood, and I co-chair, along with Minister Jones, the Hydrogen Delivery Council.
Rita?
Hi, I'm Rita Wadey. I'm the Head of Energy Policy at the National Energy System Operator.
And Jake? I'm going to come to you last, Will, for a very good reason.
Hello, I'm Jake Tudge. I lead our corporate affairs at National Gas. So like John said, we're responsible for moving gas around the country.
Brilliant, thank you.
One day it'll be hydrogen.
And Will, I just wanted to ask you to not just introduce yourself, but if you could just say a few words in response to what you heard from the Minister, that'd be great.
Thank you. Yeah, very good morning to everyone, and fantastic to see such a great turnout. So, William Mezzullo, I'm Head of Hydrogen at Centrica. I'm also very privileged to be Vice President of Hydrogen UK, a trade association for hydrogen. I'm pretty excited. I thought Sarah's speech was, and she rattles through all the things that have been achieved. I'm really quite excited. We are an industry who is positively frustrated. We want to do more. We want to expect to be doing more. And we've been there sort of as an industry, you think, I wish we were sort of a bit further along. But actually, when you realise that, we've got 11 green hydrogen projects that have been sanctioned off and government contracts. Those contracts, I challenge anyone across the world if they show me a more robust subsidy contract for hydrogen than we have them in the UK. Those are robust FID-able projects. That's a really big milestone. So in general, really positive. And I think around the clusters as well, first of a kind globally. But these are not just subsidies just to make the headlines. And that's the difference between what the UK is doing and what we are seeing in other countries and internationally, is these are support mechanisms that actually lenders, private investors will actually get to financial investment decisions, a super important thing. And that's what's been stalling in hydrogen. And I think the UK has got something really exciting going forward.
Brilliant. That's a great starting point. I also thought it might be an idea for us just to have a reflection on what's changed since we had the last Hydrogen for Life conference. I mean, obviously we've got a new government, but I think things have moved. And I think just kind of having a bit of a retrospective on where we were and where we are now. Jane, do you want to kick us off with that?
Okay, I mean, it's quite interesting because, of course, Minister Jones said, well, inevitably, with the change of government, there's a bit of a hiatus. And, of course, there is to some extent. I was asked about this earlier today, and, in fact, behind the scenes, there's been a lot of good work going on for a long time to get business models in place, etc., to get all these frameworks and structures ready so that we can get to some decisions. And actually, that didn't stop, which I think is a great credit to how this whole thing has been proceeding and how quickly the reins have been picked up. The other thing I would probably highlight with regard to hydrogen is I think the whole clean energy mission is serving to bring hydrogen's role in the power mix and making sure that there's flexibility in power provision has become much more important over the last few months. And I think that's actually very helpful because it always was there as a demand vector, but it's crystallising out very nicely. And I expect you'll talk about that, yeah. Rita. Well, I hope you will anyway.
Yeah. And actually, that's a very good point to hand over to Rita, sort of from a NESO perspective.
Yeah, so I think thinking back over the last year, I've moved into NESO, and so I'm coming at it very much from NESO as a new player on the block and a new part of the energy firmament, and what's our role going to be in delivering the hydrogen economy. And as Jane said, I think one of the really important things is going to be around understanding what the value of hydrogen can be from a whole system perspective, and bringing that understanding of what it takes to be an operable and a secure energy system, and using our strategic planning, drawing on our information that we're getting direct from industry, to work alongside the government and with Ofgem to take that long view on what kind of infrastructure you're going to need, how the markets that we're responsible for need to develop, and where hydrogen could be really important in ensuring that we can meet the government's goals, and not just net zero, but the things the Minister was talking about, making sure it's secure, making sure that bills are coming down. All of that stuff is really important, and that's what we are really getting our teeth into at the moment from a hydrogen perspective.
Fantastic, Rita, thank you. And Jake, what about you from your national gas perspective?
Yeah, so I suppose building on what John said, the point I would start with is that we're trying to deliver an enormous transformation in what is a privatised era. So that's quite an important, I think, piece of context that's sometimes perhaps not considered. You've got a number of private organisations essentially trying to change the wheels of a car whilst it's driving down the motorway. And that's going to require, I think, some prioritisation of which sort of levers you want to pull first, because it's about managing risk, it's about managing investors, it's about managing certainty on this transition. So I think there's a need for a bit of an honest conversation about where hydrogen is going to be used, because it is a premium commodity. You're either creating it from natural gas, or you're using electricity and using water, another valuable commodity, to create these clean molecules. And we should be using it where we think it's going to have a high-value application. In our view, that's three areas. Number one is long-duration storage. It is very easy, secure, reliable to store molecules for long periods of time. That's point one. Point two is power generation. I thought the Minister's use of the word baseload was fascinating, and I'm sure a number of people have picked up on that. Hydrogen is typically going to be peaking power, but if we see baseload provision as well, that's a whole different kettle of fish. And the third point is going to be around, I think, the large industry, which John mentioned. So, and giving industry, particularly those which cannot electrify, the option to decarbonise. So we are going to start small. It is going to scale over time, but to scale effectively, you are going to need to start blending. And the blending gives the certainty as offtake of last resort. As my team will attest, I'm forever getting frustrated when people talk about blending as a CO2 saving. We must stop talking about blending in terms of chemistry and talk more about blending in terms of economics. It reduces the cost of every form of low-carbon hydrogen production, and over time it will enable the delivery of a low-carbon hydrogen network. So that's where we're coming from, Natascha.
Well, that's quite a good sort of jumping off point into whole system approach, which is something I know you've been sort of working on. Can you just sort of take us through the role of hydrogen within that kind of more whole system approach?
Yeah, sure. So it started with, actually, we're developing our own green hydrogen projects. We are supplying power to hopefully a number of projects. And an observation that we'd found from really early on is, how do you bring down the cost of hydrogen? That's kind of the elephant in the room. Is the first 11 projects that have been awarded are all about just creating a production facility that can prove this industry as well. They are so important. As an industry, we need to wrap our arms around it. What the next bit is, like, how do I bring this cost down so it doesn't become a very niche product? How do I make it so much that I can store it for seasons and I can use it? And then it's not like wind 15 years ago, which is, well, hopefully my wind turbine will come down in CapEx and my O&M, things like that will come down. It's a bit more difficult than that. And the more we looked at it, the more we realized that the real way to actually bring the cost of green, low-carbon hydrogen down actually is not in the actual equipment itself, but it's around storage and pipelines. So when I hear John and Jake talk about a pipeline system and the National Infrastructure Commission's recommendation around the backbone, I'm thinking that is the way you bring down the cost of low-carbon hydrogen down, because you then make it where it's cheapest, That's probably not where you're going to use it, and it's probably not consistent sort of demand profile. And then you move it around and store it in salt caverns over time. We'd love it to be stored in rough, and that's our ambition. But actually, from a whole system thinking, you can start seeing how you bring down the cost of hydrogen. So that's a little bit about why we started doing the whole system model.
Yeah. In fact, can I just go back to you, Jake, to talk a little bit about Project Union and Project Union's role, where it was, where it is now, and Project Union's role in kind of supporting exactly that approach that Will was talking about?
Yeah, so Project Union, when we used to go into meetings with politicians and you'd slap down, we've all done it, a big photo of a map and go, that's Project Union. They'd sort of, recoil in their chair a bit and say it looks like very grand infrastructure. But actually, when you talk through it and you explain it's about repurposing pipelines, all of a sudden the conversation changes. So Project Union is going to be the repurposing of around a third of our pipelines to 100% hydrogen. A lot of our pipelines are parallel pipeline systems, so particularly when we think about the pipes connecting the Tees and Humber, for example, there's 3 or 4 major pipelines, and switching one of them to hydrogen fundamentally enables us to continue to deliver security of supply and a resilient methane-based system for many decades to come, but we can gradually convert to hydrogen. And what will happen, we think Tees and Humber will go first. It's probably a really logical place to start. You then may look to join up HyNet and Teesside, because you've then got your Track 1 clusters joining. You then can go up from either Tees or HyNet up to Scotland. And then, if you're feeling very ambitious, you can start looking at Humber all the way round to our gas terminal at Bacton, interconnecting with the European hydrogen backbone. So it's very much replicating what's happening on the continent. We saw the amazing news from the German government that said they've committed to their core hydrogen network, and we're now calling on government to do exactly the same and commit to a core hydrogen network, position it as Project Union, and of course we'd be delighted to facilitate the core hydrogen network. You decarbonise power, you decarbonise industry, and you provide resilience and security of supply, and that's so important. And you look at what the Germans have done. They've a degree of debt investment around how they've formed it. We have world-leading regulatory finance models in this country. We can use exactly the same for hydrogen, meaning that we can spread the cost over many years and deliver the most cost-effective delivery and transition to 100% hydrogen.
Brilliant. And Rita, just from NESO's sort of viewpoint and the role of hydrogen within that whole system thinking, and especially sort of the Clean Power 2030 and the role that it may or may not play.
Yeah. So we have just delivered our first piece of advice. We have a statutory duty to give advice, analysis and information to government and Ofgem when they ask for it. And they asked us for pathways that could reach Clean Power 2030 in a way that was operable and provided security of supply. And that is the core, the core of their Clean Power mission. So we've delivered that work, and obviously, you've got a bedrock of, not baseload, but a bedrock of renewables there. So renewables is going to grow enormously, and we think there's a really important role for demand-side response in that. And then you have some choices to make. You can push much further on renewables, and actually feedback during the process told us that if you went too high on renewables, that you were reaching the real outer limits and going beyond the outer limits of what was possible. But what we looked at was how we could provide, the role that dispatchable backup power that was flexible would play. Because we know that that is a key role that gas plays at the moment in the system. So what we've said is we defined for the purposes of our project that gas, you would use unabated gas around 5% of the time in a typical weather year. You still had a lot of gas capacity, but you were using it much less. And actually having CCUS to power, having hydrogen to power there, recognizing that these are not technologies that are readily available at the moment, but if they are available to the system, they play a really valuable role in pushing off that unabated gas. So we were really clear that these first-of-a-kind hydrogen-to-power projects are really essential to get away, and we said that very clearly in our advice, and that decisions need to be made so that these sorts of flexible, dispatchable, low-carbon power projects will play a much bigger role beyond 2030 when we know that the power system is going to grow. And we need that power system to stay clean. And then there's sort of, so you've got 3 buckets. You've got decarbonise the power system we've got today, let the power system grow in the way that we think it's going to in a future net zero energy system, keep that clean. Hydrogen to power has an important role to play there. And then decarbonising the things where electrification is not the answer. So we were really clear that this kind of technology, even though it feels like it's not really a 2030 story, and even though we were only talking about a handful of gigawatts of hydrogen to power, it's a really vital part of the future energy system, and we really need those projects to get away now in order to ensure that we've got confidence that they're going to be there for the future to play that role in the power system, but also help with that wider, the decarbonisation of the wider economy, for example, industry.
Brilliant, thank you. And Jane, I mean, you've been the sort of, you've been the continuity while we've had this sort of change of government, having been co-chair of the Hydrogen Delivery Council before and continuing in that role now. I mean, the conversation that we had earlier today was all about kind of how to link infrastructure with technology. And in order to sort of deliver that kind of whole system approach and sort of balancing, especially where you make the hydrogen and where it's needed, what would you say is what really needs to happen now?
Massive question, of course. So one of the really tricky parts about all of this, I think for the policymakers, is how to make the right, put in place the right policies at the right time for the specific decisions that need to happen at any given time. I think there's one thing that you are going to be producing very soon from NESO, which is the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan, and I think that's utterly essential because that will help then in the placement of those hydrogen assets. And of course, then the policy points become really quite crisped out because you need to make those decisions at the appropriate time. And so I think that's a very helpful thing, and I wish it were going to come actually a little bit quicker than it is, to be perfectly honest. If you also look, though, at some of the other things that need to happen, we've talked a lot about hydrogen and power. And, of course, as I said earlier, I think that's crystallised out. Actually, hydrogen also can be used in other ways, which we haven't particularly mentioned, but hydrogen has its use too in terms of, for example, mobility, or as a molecule in itself, in chemicals, etc., sustainable fuels, etc. And we've got all that element to build on as well. And so I think the difficult part for policymakers is making the right decisions in a sort of framework of and an order that means the economy can get started and get rolling, and then it can evolve, because none of this will stay the same over the next 30 years. So how policy will evolve is going to be quite important. So it's quite a challenging environment, and what we try to do at the Delivery Council is to look at how the next couple of years is panning out, but then the policymakers, of course, are looking right forward and seeing how that then may evolve into the future.
Yeah, brilliant. And I mean, yeah, go on.
And I think that's a really interesting point, and it's kind of cyclical as well, because we have to be really mindful of where the policy is in developing those plans, because we can't be like just, and we hope that hydrogen's going to magically appear in these places. So we have to be mindful of where the policy is in its development, where it needs to go faster, the kinds of projects that are going to be delivered. And then that will feed into strategic planning, but we also need to be influencing the government in exactly the way that you have said to ensure that the policy is there that delivers that. So there is this sort of circle, which is really interesting, particularly when you're at the beginning of these big strategic planning exercises, where we have to take information from the government and from what we're seeing on the ground to build those plans, but actually we really want to be influencing what the government are doing and what industry are doing as well, because then you get that nice feedback loop.
Yeah,
but
if I may, and a good example of one of these is when you start looking at storage
Yeah.
and where we are with policy on storage and transmission and things, and then where we are with also the projects themselves. It's a real life example of where these things need to be well aligned to make sure these things happen. So it's tricky stuff, basically.
But fundamentally, it's timelines, isn't it? So, NESO are doing a fantastic job trying to pull this all together because it's all happening so quickly. So we've had basically 6 months of working at pace to work out the sequencing of key projects. Where timelines now come into play is, Will know, how many years is it to set up Rough to hydrogen? How long do you need?
Probably about 3 or 4 years.
Right, so you need 3 or 4 years. If you're a power station connected to the NTS, you probably have an outage, every 4 to 5 years for a big refit? So you're going to need your burners and your combustion chambers changing. Most of them are blend ready, but converting to 100% is a good 4 or 5 year notice period. If you are a large industry, you've probably got an international board. That board needs an investment paper. That board then needs a 3-4 year horizon for the investment, the outage, the economic impact of not producing a product for a defined period of time. If you are an industrial user, like one's connected to our network, they're probably saying we care about net zero and we want to do the right thing. And to a degree, through ESG, our financing regime, we are mandated to. But actually, we just care that there's something arriving in that pipe that fuels the process that I need to do to make products and make services that we can export and use domestically. So you start aligning all that, then you align the power stations, the industries, the storage, the network, and you realize that actually the pipes will probably start to be used in a way that's probably quite inefficient. They'll have low utilization and we'll have to ramp it up quite quickly. And the idea is that you want to ramp up that utilization as quickly as possible so that you're minimizing cost to the final consumer. So that's why we have to pick areas. And that's why we're saying Tees and Humber, you're probably going to fill that pipe as quickly as you can, create a market and deliver the lowest cost transition. But we just need to start. And when you think about electricity, you can have anticipatory investment regimes, you can deliver investment ahead of need. In gas, you've got to be 100% full as a pipe before you can secure a return. Yeah. And it's just you learn to be very passionate about pipes at National Gas, but small things like that are interesting.
I want to come to Jane.
So I think this is quite important. This is why the clusters are so important.
Exactly.
Because off-taker is one of the reasons why projects aren't going forward at the moment, globally, because people don't have the off-take agreements. And the timescale for these off-take agreements is often required to be very long. But classically, if you're an industrial user, you don't sign off-takes, usually, of the duration that's needed to enable the sort of contractual arrangements. And so this is a really tricky dilemma, and it makes it hard to get the financing of projects over the line. Exactly. But clusters are a big part of the key, because by joining the demand and the supply together, there's a chance of making it work. So I love the cluster approach.
Which is, of course, what NESO and the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan is looking to do, isn't it?
Well, I think the clusters will play in a couple of ways. So there will be projects in the Strategic Spatial Plan which will be in clusters, but then we're also thinking about bottom-up regional energy strategic planning, and I think that really gives an opportunity to think about how the clusters could grow and go upwards to meet the national objective. So we're looking at strategic planning top-down, sort of gigawatt scale, and then also looking at regional planning and seeing how those two things meet together. And I love a cluster as well, and have had to pretend to be an industrial cluster in some of the sessions we've been having about spatial planning. And, we know that the clusters have done an enormous amount of work already, so it's really important that we plug into that, because they've been thinking about their infrastructure. They've had the funding from UKRI to think about their decarbonisation pathways, and we need to be really leveraging that information.
Brilliant. Natascha, may I add a local point? So, Rita, you're talking about local demand. I think that's such an important point as we think about what will probably largely be the electrification of heat. So that will probably provide a majority of the solution in the future with heat pumps. And actually what's fascinating there is what will be the impact on the electricity grid. So when we think about our supply to the over 30 power stations connected to the grid that are gas driven, we've seen each year over the past 5 years an increasing swing over a defined period. So 4 or 5 years ago, over 4 hours, you would maybe see a swing of around 10 gigawatts of gas power. Earlier this month, we saw 16 gigawatts swing over 4 hours. So you've had to supply the gas to power stations, the equivalent of, 5 Hinkley points, roughly, to basically turn on in 4 hours as the wind drops. As you electrify heat, as you electrify transport, as you electrify every part of society, what is going to happen to the power grid? The modelling suggests it is going to become more volatile in a good way as we get more renewables on the grid, but it's going to require a greater flexibility of flexible, dispatchable, as you said, power that could be hydrogen, that could be gas with CCS or others.
It's a really important point, Jake. I'm going to shave off 5 minutes of each panel today so that we get to 4:15 on time. But just a really quick one, Will, and everybody else. What would you say are the key policy barriers, and how can they be overcome in order to kind of just get hydrogen into that energy mix?
Rather than a barrier, I'll call it an opportunity. So we have an ambitious hydrogen production target, which is very good. It really needs to be accompanied with a tangible storage target and a hydrogen to power target. So if you had a 10 gigawatt production target and a 10 terawatt hour storage by 2030, matched by 10 gigawatts of dispatchable power to hydrogen by 2030, it's an ambitious target, but so is Clean Power 2030. And we've got that as a target. And that just really sharpens the mind. So when you're locating your hydrogen production facility, and when NESO are working with DESNZ around rolling out where is the optimum location for storage and pipelines, they have a target in mind. And they understand that actually this production facility is joined to this storage, and it starts creating that whole system. So I think, though, it's rather than a barrier, it's sort of thinking, we've got production going, you really, really now need to be thinking ambitiously on storage and transport.
Great, yeah. Jake, briefly, what would you say would be your key policy ask to get hydrogen sort of up and running properly?
Oh, blend into the transmission network.
How did I know you were going to say that?
Yeah, I know. It's sort of, we're expecting a decision by the end of this year. Obviously recognise there's been a small event in July that may have delayed it. But we're hoping for that decision as soon as possible. We know, and there's some people sat in the room that can quantify this over breaks, that we know it can almost halve the cost of green hydrogen in future HAR rounds. So getting the decision is not just important for security of supply, as John mentioned, but actually for reducing the cost of green hydrogen. We said to Treasury, you can either have twice as much for the same amount of money, or you can have it half price.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Rita?
Not a barrier, but I think just, really keen to see my wonderful former colleagues in the room maintain the momentum. Because we know that there is a pipeline of decisions that are coming. I do think blending into the transmission network is important. I think understanding when the business models for transport and storage are going to come about so that we can get a sense of when those things are going to arrive in those timelines is really critical.
And I'm going to give the last word to you, Jane.
So I'm not going to plump for a single policy point, but I'm going to say, because I think we've heard some very good ones already, but the bringing together of the cross-departmental activity in government, I think, is very important, because we can talk about what DESNZ are doing, what DFT are doing. This is very important because hydrogen is not only about power and energy, it's also about other things. And so wherever possible, to make that as cohesive as possible as we go through this very fast transition, it would be my extra ask, if you like.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, all four of you. And thank you for all the work that you've been doing and continue to do on getting hydrogen to be a reality in the UK. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Brilliant. Well done. Right. We'll break for coffee now. What time is it, somebody?
11.
Oh, it's 11:11. Okay, so that's where we're sort of on track. Yeah, we're absolutely bang on track. So if we can come back at 11:30, we'll have the second panel. Thank you very much.